We talk a lot about what is role playing in the RPG community. Hell, even I did a video on the topic myself. But today I want to talk about what is a game. And it's not that nobody talks about it, but I think many get it wrong. The conversation often revolves around the need of some dice roll or some form of randomness for it to be a game. And I think this can be an element of a game, but it's not necessary element of a game. Although in RPG, should still be present except for some rare occasion. But if we think of what a game is, we can think of many games that are obviously games, but don't have any randomness, like chess, checkers, or Go. What makes a game, amongst other things, are rules and choices. The need for rules is pretty obvious. Without rules, a role playing game would just be free play, like when little kids play Cowboy and Indian and argue about the result of a shot. You know, like, oh, I killed you, no, I'm not dead. Or just role play without the game aspect. But the point I mostly wanted to talk about was choices. Could you have a game without choices? You could say that Truth and Ladder is a game without choice. But you could also argue that it's not really even a game. I heard people call it a zero player game because the gameplay itself. And there's a reason why we see it as only a game for very young children. And even other games that are highly reliant on chance still include choices. Even in gambling, you get to choose what kind of bet you make, when to fold, when to raise, and you still have like very meaningful choice. And meaningful is important here. The choice you get need to feel like they have an impact. Another important part of choice is that they need to be non-obvious. If you get two choice, but one is evidently the right one, then you don't really have a choice. This is where randomness often come into play. Because a good way to make a choice non-obvious is with a system of risk-reward. If you're uncertain of the outcome of a choice, you have two choice and with different possible outcome, they have different risk-reward profiles, then the decision become more engaging. We don't need to be game designer to run RPG, but having some notion of game design can help. We often hear the mantra of ruling over rules, and that is fair to some extent. RPG gives the player much more liberty than any other games, so they cannot have rules for every little aspect. But without any rules, they lose the game side of things. And even when a ruling is necessary, this should be done in the spirit of the rules, and it should be done with fairness and consistency. Relying too much on the rule of cool turns RPG in collaborative storytelling. If your only factor for if a character can do something is it cool, well then you're not a game anymore. And for some people, this is what they're after, and so that's fine. But you're not really role playing anymore. You're not really in a role playing game anymore. You can be in role play, but you're not in a role playing game. As for choice, it is something important to consider when creating adventure, but it's not what I wanted to focus on here. I want to remind you to be mindful of keeping choice meaningful when homebrewing rules or designing them if you are a designer. For example, in OD&D, every weapon did a d6 of damage. So the weapon choice weren't really meaningful one. It didn't matter, it was just cosmetic. Later on in the game, the weapon did different damage and speed factor were introduced. So now you had some sort of choice. Do I want to hit more often but for less damage? Or hit harder but less often? If you decide to homebrew the system, trying to simplify it, you could decide to go back to every weapon doing a d6, but if you don't change the speed factor, you make the fastest weapon just obviously better. If you go on the other way, removing the speed factor while keeping the different damage, you're also getting rid of the trade-off, and you're making the harder hitting weapon obviously better. And it's not to say that everything needs to be a matter of trade-off and somewhat balanced. It shouldn't. Some things are just like better than others. But it is to say to think about the consequence of a rules or of a rule change. There's an obsession with rule lightness in some part of the hobby. But that doesn't necessarily make for better games. Some mechanical complexity is required to engage the player intellectually, or at least to activate some part of the brain, not just rely on imagination and creativity. I think this is a strength of role-playing game, how much of the different parts of the brains it can activate. There's like a creative, an emotional, the strategic, the tactical, the pure intellectual, the out-of-the-box thinking. There's nothing like it. Although on the other side, if the rules are too heavy, player can be overwhelmed and refuse to engage with the choice presented or get analysis paralysis. So there's some kind of a middle ground to reach, and this middle ground is quite wide, and the sweet spot will vary from group to group. So I can't really give you like a universal answer here. That's what I want to talk about today. It's gonna be a short video, and a bit on focus. I'm sorry, I've been like very busy with real life lately, so I hope I still give you something to cudgel about. If you have a subject you'd like me to talk about, let me know down below. And I'm not out of subject, but if you want me to if you want my take on something specific, and if I have something to say about it, I'll consider it. Thank you for watching. Have a good day and take care.